Hello, everybody. Thanks for the organization to have us here. Uh, and unfortunately, we couldn't make it to DEFCON this year. We are here to talk about our experience at the public hacking trials of the Brazilian election systems. That's a trial that the election authority does every election, and we participated in three editions. Uh, Last year was the last one. So we are three forensic experts at the Brazilian Federal Police. Mr. Galileo Batista also works at the Federal Institute of Rio Grande do Norte as a teacher. So about us, uh, we are three guys very interested and very curious about election systems, and we are fortunate enough to that our employer allows us to go there and try to break things. So it's very fun. It's very good that someone pays us to do that. Well, about the election in Brazil is very complicated. It wouldn't be fair to describe everything in this presentation, but I try to summarize what's important so you can understand what we are talking later. So to have an election, we need three main components. We need a voter database, so voters need to register to vote, so they are provided a number that identifies them, and the election authority collects fingerprints from the voters, and these fingerprints are used to authenticate at the election day. They also maintain a database of candidates and the election software. The software is developed inside the election authority. We'll talk about this more later. There is a preparation phase before the election. This is a very important step because at this point, all software is compiled, it's signed, and its hashes are taken in a public ceremony, and they produce some installation media that has all the election software and the information about voters and candidates. After that, also before the election, they generate the installation media for the electronic ballots and they install them. There are a lot of ballots they're using in Brazil, around 500,000 ballots, so it's very lengthy process and has to be completed before the election. And usually, the election authority installs two types of ballots. One used for the actual voting, and the other ones that are used for contingency. If something goes wrong, they have an extra ballots to switch them, and they have a procedure to continue the voting where it stopped. So this is a very complicated process, and many things can go wrong here. Also, when the ballots are installed, the media that's used to install the ballots record the correspondence table. This table has the serial number of the voting machine and the serial number of the media and what place did it install, what voting place. So this is something that goes to the election authority, and later they can check if that specific ballot produces a result that corresponds to something that was installed before and the rightful place where it is installed. So after the voting process, the ballot produces a result. These results are all signed. There are mainly two kinds of results. Totalized result, we call BU, which is the acronym for Boletim de Urna, and RDV, which is the individual votes shuffled. So you can compare these two files. And this is transmitted to the election authority, and after all of the results are received, they publish the results. So this is very simplified version of how things work. So this is the electric ballot. On the left, you can see the 2015 model, which is an older model. You can see there are two different pieces of hardware with a long cable connecting them. The larger piece is used by the voter to register the votes, and the smaller piece is used by the authority at the voting place to type the number of the voter and collect the biometry to check if it's really the voter who is voting, and to enable the larger piece to get the votes. This model uses compact flash cards, mainly two of them, one in the slot that is visible from the exterior, and one internal for the installation of the operating system and the software. And you have a thumb drive that goes on the side, and this thumb drive, when the voting ends, you can remove it and send the results. And on the right, you have the newer model. You can see that the smaller terminal is now different. They have a touch screen panel, not a keyboard anymore. You see the fingerprint reader at the top, and you have the larger piece which is where the voters vote. So it's mainly the same thing, just a little different. And now the media has changed. Inside it is an SSD card for recording the operating system, and externally there are two USB devices for loading the software and collecting the results. Well, about the security trials, this is done by, there is a formal resolution from the election authority. The last one was published in 2015, and this is mandatory. Before each election, they have to do this trial, and they have to invite people to try to hack the election system. So any Brazilian adults can participate, has to be older than 18 years. And everyone participating can have access to the source code of election systems. So they say this is a security barrier they lift, so you can take a look at the code that runs on the ballot software and other systems. And after seeing this code, you can devise an attack plan. So you have to beforehand tell the election authority what you're going to do and what you're going to need. This is somehow a limitation, but we can understand how they do this. On the 2021 edition, we had 6 days to perform this attack plan. Before it was fewer days. We'll talk about this later. One thing that's important to notice is that you can't take pictures of anything. You can bring in your cell phone, no electronic equipment. Anything you need has to be approved by election authorities. So everything you're gonna bring, software, virtual machines, etc., you have to submit a formal request and they have to approve for you to get in. So this is, I couldn't translate this, sorry. This is what they call the election ecosystem, which is all the systems, all the technology involved in the election. So a small part of it is part of the trials, mostly the part which is more public, because you have computers that are installed on the regional election authorities that are used to generate the media that's been installed on electronic ballots. You have the software for the electronic ballot itself that's called Linux, which is a modified version of Linux. You have the transporting software that sends the results back to the election authority, which is a Java application. And you have this JE Connect, which is a Linux in 2 thumb drives that you can boot a PC, connect to the election authority VPN, and send the results from there. And also the parts that receives the files at the other end. So this is what you can try to hack on this trial. There are other systems that are not in this trials. So this is what you can do here. This is a picture by the election authority that they publish in their website. You can see here people from the organization. So you have a place to work they provide you some computers. These computers are dual boot with Windows and Ubuntu. You can bring stuff and install there. They provide VirtualBox, so you can provide virtual machines like Kali, Remnant, etc. These computers have no internet, so you have to be aware that if you miss some package, if you need to install something, it will be difficult to do, especially Linux packages that have a lot of dependencies. There are people that supervise what you are doing. They take notes, etc. It's been flagged here as unorganized. You have a bunch of computers at the back that has source code, so you can go there, take a look at source code, get some new ideas, but you can't take a thumb drive there and copy things. You have to write down with pen and paper. You have observers that can go there, see the teams working. You have the investigators that can be individual or groups. And you have a set of computers with internet where you can browse, search something, or download software and ask for permission to copy them to your computer. And there is a security checkpoint at the entrance, so you have to leave everything, keys, cell phones, watches, etc. So this is mainly the environment that you have. It's not ideal, but we managed to have some successes in this environment, as you'll see shortly. So the first trial that we participated was in 2017. And at the time, we devised an attack plan to attack the boot scheme of the electronic ballot. So the electronic ballot has a very complicated scheme for booting. It has a security device, a hardware device inside the ballot. This hardware device is the first thing that is turned on when you turn the machine on. And it checks the signatures of the firmware, the bootloader, and the kernel. So if anything is changed, won't boot, it locks out the ballot. After it checks and everything is okay, it passes the control to the firmware, which loads the bootloader. The bootloader has a AES key that decrypts the kernel, and the kernel has another key that decrypts the file system. The file system itself is not encrypted, but the blocks are. So inside this file system, you have the programs, including the voting program. You have signatures from all the binaries and all the libraries and all the files that go there. And you have some cryptographic keys that are used to sign something that goes out from the ballot. So our target was to decrypt these cryptographic keys and perhaps use them for something malicious. So when we were analyzing source code, we saw that the installation software uses Linux to boot the electronic ballot. In the master boot record, we saw something very strange. Usually, it checks for an active partition and loads the bootloader and transfers control to it. But at the code we saw, they modified this, so it always goes through an error. So the master boot never loads the bootloader. And they changed the message from operating system loading error to something like superior electoral courts. This program was made to execute at the electronic ballot. So if you get a flashcard reader and try to boot this on the regular PC, you will get this message and the software will never load. One thing that we think is happening here is that the firmware for the electronic ballot loads the bootloader directly and ignores the master boot record. So what was our plan? We were thinking, well, they used Linux, right? So we can reconstruct the original master boot record, boot this card on a virtual machine, and then make an external memory dump. So usually the ballot would check that the card was tampered with and will not boot, but we are booting this on a virtual machine that doesn't have security hardware. So this is a nice catch we had. With the memory boot, we will extract the file system key, decrypt the file system, and then recover the private keys. And hopefully we could sign some material from ballots that don't have the security device, because the ballots that have the security device provide a double signature. It signs with the software key and signs with the hardware key, but the older ballots that were fabricated before 2009 doesn't have this kind of stuff. So what we did, this is, you have to understand, it took 4 days, 4 full days. This is very a short version of it. It was very hard to do. But we made a copy of the installation media, a forensic copy. We reconstructed the MBR. I printed an XDump of the bytes and typed it in using an X editor, because I was afraid they won't allow me to enter with a thumb drive. And we were able to boot it with QEMU, and it failed when it was loading the initial process from the Linux operating system. But at this point, the volume that was encrypted was mounted, so the key was in memory. But we weren't able to dump the memory, something related to GDB and QEMU running on Windows. So we had to convert the image to VDI and use VirtualBox, and this worked. So we are able to get the memory. And we found the key next to a string, probably a structure that says AES XTS, which is the algorithm they use. We tried two software which called Find AES and AES Find, but they failed to find the key. Later, we found the bulk extractor works really better with this. And we could compare this key with the key found by another group, because they found it on the source code. The election authority failed to remove the key from the source code, and they found it, so we can compare and check it was the right one. So this thing took the 4 days. We couldn't go any further. But the other group, which is the Diego Aranha group that made a presentation here a few years ago, were able to decrypt the file system and shared with us. And we saw the private keys, but we didn't have time to decrypt them. So after that, they changed the way they store, they encrypt information on the electronic ballot. They had a random table of values at the firmware, and they would derive the keys from these values. So at the installation process, the compiling process, they would encrypt this information using this table, and you could only decrypt it inside the ballot. And they did some validation of the MBR and the bootloader by software. So they called us again the next year to try again our track plan. This is something that always happens. And we were able to subvert these validations by reverse engineering and patching the card, but the kernel failed to load because it needed this random table. We would have to need to get a firmware dump from the hardware to maybe try to get this working. So, and now the file system is no longer encrypted, and they use the secure hardware to encrypt and protect the keys. Now they have no more ballots that doesn't have secure hardware. They can use the secure hardware to secure everything. So we think this helped protect the system better. And they wrote an article about this that you can check on this link there. Now I will pass over to Mr. Galileo. He will talk about the next public trial that happened in 2009.
Hello everybody, I'm Galileo, and I will talk about our participation in TPS 2019. In that edition, you submitted 2 attack plans, both focused on the machine acting as proxies between electoral system and the ballots. Well, those Windows 10 machines are critical because they control what can go to the ballots. At the same time, there are hundreds of those spread in the country. Obviously, the guys in the electoral court have hardened them in several ways. For that, they created a set of tools called SCHEN. First, SCHEN changed the Windows authentication system. That is a completely new credential provider implemented in-house. After that, all significant programs and keys are protected in a TrueCrypt volume. This volume is only mounted after a successful login, so relevant components are not visible in offline attacks. Files in NTFS get also an extra protection layer using drivers to enforce more strict conditions. If you get a fake login and even you mount the TrueCrypt volume, these drivers will deny access to the files. Last, SCHEN installs hooks in the Windows and only allows authorized applications to run. Summarizing, it's hard to do anything on these machines that was not foreseen by developers. So, if you wanted to do something on a SCHEN machine, we should decrypt the TrueCrypt container to understand what kind of data there was there. At that moment, we didn't know anything about them. But as Peixinho said, we could read the source code during the TPS, and analyzing it, we found the exact point where the TrueCrypt password is derived. We saw some different strings in that function, and we supposed those strings would be in memory during the execution. So you decide to run all the system in a virtual box. Of course, we lost time in this process because the image took more than 1 day. But after all, we got a guest machine running, we dumped its memory. We were right. Analyzing the dump, we found the strange strings, and close to them, we found a sequence that seemed to be a password. We checked it, and bingo, we had found the TrueCrypt password. With the mounted volume, we explored the file system and found a private key. This key signed data sent to the ballot. Unfortunately, the key could not be used directly because it was protected by ASCBC. After analysis, we managed to unprotect the key itself. A Python program to do this task was written. Even after unprotecting the key, we couldn't use it because it is part of a non-public cryptographic system. In fact, the system was developed by Brazilian intelligence agency. Yes, state cryptography. No programs available to check if the key was correct. With one private key, but without a program to sign data directly, we should use the GDIU in a live system. This demanded disabling all protection we talked before. Using an incremental strategy and the highest build CD, we restored the original credential provider, we created a local admin user, and prevent all security drivers from starting. This process was not easy because every time we solved a problem, another would appear. But we finally got a successful login without SCHEN, and we could mount TrueCrypt volume using the already discovered password. At that moment, we had a completely operational system without SCHEN, and we were able to install and run any program. The first program installed was XDBG64. Why? To force GDI sign fake data. But new problems appeared. GDI was packed using a customized version of UPX, and it also looked for validation in SCHEN. Using the debugger, both of them were bypassed. So, we were capable to change real data to fake ones, intercepting the correct call to write file A, and BALLOT accepted. The date changed was related to voting information such as seat and state. We must say that the votes themselves were not modified or identified. The national press has covered the TPS, and here we can see our results in an important TV news at that night. In 2020, we returned to evaluate fixes made by developers. They had improved detection of virtual machines and memory dumps. SIS got updates too, for example, removing string constants from the code. But the most important, the voting places are not signed by GEDI anymore. Other keys are protected in TPM modules, making them much more resistant to attacks. However, not all the fixes were effective. Using a virtual hardener, we were able to bypass new protection and run the system as a virtual machine. We also found, using book extractor, the key for mounting the TrueCrypt volume. This was made using MK decrypt. Decrypting private key failed, as expected, because the TPM was different or absent in VirtualBox. The roadmap of the Electoral Court includes full disk encryption using BitLocker. By the way, we are informed that is implemented now. And last, they think opening the code of the state cryptography used in the system.
The election in Brazil has a big logistic problem. The electronic vote machine must travel to all corners of the country. There are places that are difficult to access, and the logistics to reach these places include planes, helicopters, and boats. Sometimes it can take days, and the results of an election cannot take that long to be counted. So, the election authority created a solution to transmit vote machine results over the internet to the totalization system from these places. This solution is JTAG Connect. The system is compounded of 2 thumb drives and a pin code. Since the public trial of 2019, our team planned to take a deeper look at JTAG Connect system, but was unable to do that on 2019. So last year, on 2021, we had that chance. We must remember that the results are signed by the vote machine, and the totalization system knows by the correspondence table the results that must be received for each vote machine. So, what is JTAG Connect? JTAG Connect is like a live USB. There is one thumb drive with the operating system that when boots ask for a pin code that must be inserted together with the second thumb drive to decrypt the operating system. After the boot, the user can see this front end to connect to Election Authority VPN. The user has no other access to other softwares or any shell on the system. With the VPN connected, a container with the transportation software is decrypted and mounted so that the transportation program can be run. This program validates and transfers the results from one or more voting machines to the totalization system. So, what could our team do to attack this solution, the JTAG Connect system? We can try to find the key to decrypt the boot and OS partitions. We could try to find the key to decrypt the transportation software container. And so we could access the VPN config files and keys to connect to the VPN. And at last, we could try to execute softwares without any control of the JTAG Connect to probe and attack the internal infrastructure of the election. What was our attack plan and execution? The plan was to decrypt the Linux, the live USB of the JTAG Connect kit, obtain the VPN configuration files, and connect externally to the JTAG Connect system to the internal infrastructure of the election authority. First, we tried to boot the OS thumb drive using a virtual machine. This process failed, but a message was printed suggesting that the boot partition was mounted. We don't know why the virtual machine could not continue to load the system. So we did a memory dump, and using the program book extractor, we could find the master key and mount the boot partition using Linux Unified Key Setup. After, we needed to deal with the need to run FS format to mount and edit the initialization scripts to show us how the pin code and the second thumb drive were used to mount the OS partition. We managed to get the master key of the operating system partition and could mount and set a root to the root partition of the JTAG Connect kit on a Kali Linux system. The majority of the softwares inside JTAG Connect were developed using Python, so we were able to run the software and understand what the kit was doing, and discovered the other keys that were used by JTAG Connect. We managed also to connect to the VPN and run a shell to probe the internal infrastructure. Unfortunately, the time for the public trial was over by then. So, what we had until now? The Python scripts, the process to obtain the master key of new JTAG Connect kits. Remember that the pin code is still necessary. We had the endpoints and VPN config files, and the IP address of the totalization system. After the public trial, the electoral justice had 6 months to improve their solution. And for the retrial, some changes were made on the JTAG Connect infrastructure. There are now 2 VPNs. The first one is a quarantine VPN. The server side of JTAG Connect sends a challenge to the client and tests this client. There is also a security software to monitor the VPN connections and detect anomalous behaviors. If any anomalous behavior is detected, or the client could not solve the challenge, the connection is dropped and the certificate of the client is revoked. The JTAG Connect kit components, the thumb drives and pins, had no modifications, and our team could again decrypt and mount all partitions and containers. We also could connect to the first and second VPN, but when we tried to scan the network, our connection was dropped and the certificate revoked. The server side of the JTAG Connect was enhanced and could detect and mitigate our attack. We think that a solution to the client side of JTAG Connect system would be a dedicated hardware with TPM protection for transmitting the results.
So this is it. For conclusions, we like to tell you that the election systems in Brazil are very complex. We have a very big country. We have logistic challenges. Had the same software run on 500,000 ballots and all the complexity that's involved in this. There are many systems involved, and it's all designed and implemented by the election authority, different from other countries. What I think it's good in this sense is they have the control of the hardware and the software, so they can protect things, mixing hardware and software. One thing that we must have in mind is that the system creates a chain of trust from the day that the software is compiled. And this chain of trust is all done by digital signatures. So the security of the whole system is bound to the security of digital signatures. The Brazilian election system is very different from the US system. They have a tight control on the hardware, so they know each ballot that was manufactured, they discard it securely, so we never saw any of this happen to be selling on an eBay site or something like that. They call this kind of electronic ballot TDRE, like a trusted direct through voting equipment. So the equipment doesn't have any non-electronic evidence of traces of the vote, but it's a trusted device. It has specialized hardware, specialized software for signing and protecting everything that is generated. We think that the public trials help to improve the overall security of the system. We think they are very important, but we also think there are always room for improvement. So we think the election system is a long-term process, and each year we try to provide more and more suggestions to improve the software. So this is it. Here are our contacts. We thank you very much for having the patience to listen to non-English speakers. So thank you very much, and we are available for questions on the